Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Performance Shift. Oh my gosh, another episode. We are on episode number 10. And if you have wondered what it takes to achieve remarkable success, to overcome obstacles and transform your performance in the face of big change, then you are in the right place.
Yes, you are. This is Performance Shift, the show that will take you on a journey of discovery, exploration, and transformation, and give the tools you need to navigate your own moments of change.
My name's John Register, a two-time Paralympic athlete, combat vet, and an author.
Right from Paris Paralympic
Right
Games.
from Paris, and yes, lots of stuff going on.
And I'm Kat Coppett, an organizational consultant, author, and improviser.
And together we are sharing our expertise, our insights into navigating change and finding success in the
You know, the Paralympics isn't a great
oh my God
sign of that.
Yeah, we could talk about the Paralympic Games because there's a lot of I think in our topic today we can learn these lessons from, and I think we're going to get right into this.
Absolutely. So what is our topic today?
So the topic today is all around letting go of old stories. Letting go of old stories. I don't know if you've ever been out there, and you that who are out there share, but it really no longer serves the purpose. And one of the things I found, Kat, we're talking about the Paralympic Games, those games for athletes with physical disabilities and visual impairment, is that we share this old narrative that people with disabilities are not capable. So we see the capability of people on the track, in the swimming pool. And one of my jobs that I had at the Paralympic Games in Paris was to begin to help people build a narrative of beyond the games. So getting and releasing from those old narratives, it couples along with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act signed into law by George H.W. Bush. We have now curb cutouts, we have ramps, we have accessible physical accessibility, but the jobs needle hasn't moved hardly any. So the mindset is still old. The mindset is still not capable, even though we see the capability and celebrate the capability in what I kind of call the what to wow to now. What is this going on? What are these Paralympic Games? Oh, wow, these athletes are amazing. They're superhuman. Well, actually, are they superhuman? They're really just advancing and doing something that they love to do in a world that really wasn't designed for them. And because it was designed for us, if we don't think that we could actually operate in their world, we think it's superhuman.
Right.
And then finally, now what do I do with this information? So now that I know that these athletes are capable, where else am I missing in my own narrative of their capabilities? So that's when I think about we brought up Paralympics. That's why I went down that road, and in the Paralympic Games, that's kind of how it usually plays out.
I think it's a incredibly powerful example of what we're talking about on so many different levels, right?
Yeah.
There's what are the stories? When we talk about old stories, how do we even recognize, first of all, the stories that we're telling, right? How do we recognize what are the assumptions and ambient narratives that we have around disability, right? And what's so powerful about the existence of the Paralympic Games for everyone involved, I think, is that it challenges and disproves and replaces a lot of those old stories that we have collectively with some new examples of stories. And I, as you're talking, I'm imagining for us, the spectators, and for the athletes themselves, right? You tell your story about losing your leg and how you had to shed your narratives and assumptions, many of them inherited culturally, right?
Yes, right.
About what that meant for you. And then you were able to flip those narratives for yourself by proving your achievement. And then the last thing that I heard there was sort of then how do we pull that thread through so that it's not just a story of some crazy exceptionalism? Although these, to be fair, these athletes really are exceptional, just like all athletes who end up in the Olympics of any sort, right? These are exceptional.
Absolutely.
But how do we pull the narrative of capability, right? Maybe extraordinary capability through back into our full lives and our full context. Did I get
Yes.
that right?
Absolutely. And Michael Burns gave you a thumbs up on that one. So uh,
Nice.
that is, that's exactly right. And going back to personally, when I first had the amputation, and you brought in like the cultural narrative that I was not even telling myself that I had a bias against, I was now in that experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's what holds us back from advancing the story, because we're so locked into what the narrative has stated, or the narrative of the story.
Right.
When I was just sharing this with a group of folks in my last client I just had, Socure, and they are an online protect your identity information massive company. And one of the things I was sharing with them as they were moving forward was this elevation of the micro wins that we have to have in order to advance. And sometimes what happens is we get complacent with our own narrative, and that holds us back from the micro adjustment we need to do to keep on pressing, to keep on winning. So I shared a story with them around with John McDonald, the most winningest coach in NCAA history, any sport, 42 national championships for the Arkansas Razorbacks, which I was on that team to begin that process of those national championships. So he won the Triple Crown multiple years. And one of the things he did was he ensured that the old story was always gone. This is a new year. And so we need to advance in this year, because no one's trying to win our medal from last year. Right?
Right.
So that really helped me understand and push me in a way to see my own narrative differently. Why was I believing the narrative that was being shared about people with disabilities and holding myself back and saying, oh, kind of, I was going down this downward spiral, woe is me and all this. I was buying into what maybe every Halloween we see all these ghosts and goblins and everything that's out there, Hannibal Lecter, and we see Jason, and we saw these masks of people with disabilities that are deformed and maybe mentally challenged as well. And then when we come to have a national healthcare or mental health conversation, we can't do it because we have these biases of the ticket that we bought for every Halloween. And so we can't push ourselves away from that narrative.
Right.
We begin to hold on to it. We'd love to know some of your thoughts around that and why we're so attached to these stories.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question, why we're so attached. I have some thoughts on it. Before I answer that, I just want to say one of the things that I heard in what you just said is the first step is to recognize that we have them, right? I mean, these narratives are like the water we swim in. We don't see it, right? We're like fish in water.
That's right. I love that analogy you use.
Right? Like we don't, so for you to even recognize, oh, I'm telling myself a story about disability, I think is the first step of letting go of narratives that don't serve us. The answer to your question, why are we so attached to them, is probably, a PhD thesis. But what comes up for me is that we are very attached to having coherent identities, I think, knowing who we are and having that somehow be consistent. I think there's a safety in that. And I've been on a crusade for many years against personality type indicator instruments like the Myers-Briggs and all of that. And one
Right.
of the reasons, other than the fact that they're not very legitimate instruments, right? Scientifically, they don't kind of play out as real. The other thing I don't like about them is I feel like they reinforce and reify these stories we have about ourselves. And the story about these instruments are you fit in this box, you've always been this way, this is your core personality, and you might change a little behavior here and there, but this is the authentic you. And I think we get attached to stories partly because we don't recognize that they exist. It's comfortable to feel like we understand and have a grasp on what's true. And if we shift it, it gets uncomfortable because we're on shakier ground. And thirdly, I think the world reinforces that we're supposed to, if we're authentic or true to ourselves, that there's some way that changing or letting go isn't possible or real. And yeah.
I was talking with Sonia Dumas.
Mm-hmm.
She is one of these brilliant minds. Every time I go to the National Speakers Association national conference, there's always one person that elevates that rise. Actually, there were several that for me this year that did
Yeah.
that. She was one of them. And one of the things she was talking about is, and she does a lot around AI. Instead of calling it artificial intelligence, she goes back to the original language of advisory intelligence. And I said, well, that's interesting within inside of itself. So I wound up going down to Dallas where she lives, and I had a speech down there, and we met up for breakfast. And I said, I need to talk to you about this because I began to see in the letting go of story, that's where I really make my bread and butter. Right? It's what I do best to help people with that transition. And it started crystallizing for me, right? I don't help people actually jump and make the jump. I still believe that that person has to attack their own hurdle, has to jump their own hurdles in life. However, we can make it a softer landing, or we can help with story around the narrative of why this is going to be good for you, but you ultimately have to make the jump. And we started talking about the folks in my world that struggle with the old narrative. For example, professional athletes who are with their teams. And most of the articles I read around it it's pretty flippant. Right? It's you just gotta, set your transition up, but not taking in consideration that this person probably started their career in this sport probably at 5 or 6 years of age in Pee Wee leagues. And that same group of people just got tighter and tighter, smaller and smaller. So they saw them every weekend or every Wednesday night, Saturday morning, whenever it was, even on to the college field, and then to maybe the professional ranks, maybe to the NBA championships or the NFL. All of them elevated together, and now they come to a precipice where they no longer can be that identity any longer. That is terrifying.
It's rough.
And I was thinking about it from that standpoint of, and we've said it here. We've said it. My amputation was a traumatic, abrupt accident that took me off in a different direction. So where my old narrative was, it was gone right away in a split second. And as Sonia challenged me, she said, they're all abrupt. I said,
What?
yes. And she was giving me a different perspective on how to see it. And it was
What do you mean by that? If they're all abrupt?
Because we can train for the transition. We can do everything we do in our power to make sure that the transition is set up, but there comes the point in time when you have to commit to it. And that's where everything aligns.
Yeah.
There will be a day when you no longer are going to be on that field of play. There will be a day when you're no longer going to be kicking down doors with your unit in the military. There will come a day when you will elevate from high school to college. There will come a day. So all these transitions that happen, there is a point of embarkation or leaving one thing and advancing to the next.
Yeah. And what talk to me about the danger in those moments that you see of clinging to old narratives, whatever they are. Maybe my value in the world is this. Maybe it's a simple question, but
The danger, I believe, is on innovation. We're stagnant. There is no adjutant in our water and our sphere that is continuing to push us to grow. We think we've arrived.
mm,
One analogy is I don't have a cup around me, I don't think, but I was telling a group yesterday, a client I was talking to, if people would use the analogy half full, half empty cup, and all that analogy, we all know it. And number one, I'm so thankful that there's something in the cup, right? That's one. The second thing is, if something is being poured into my cup, can I pour it out equally as fast? Because if it fills up and you're still trying to pour into it, it makes a mess, splatters all over everybody. So I want to be almost like a sieve, right? It comes into me and it flows out through me. So I'm constantly being filled and constantly pushing out that information. This way I can direct it. It's just like a stream. So I think that's one kind of analogy that I look at. We always are in constant, we should be in constant growth, always pressing ourselves to be a little better tomorrow than we are today. And so with Socure, I was sharing with them the Olympic motto of Citius, Altius, Fortius, translated into English, swifter, higher, stronger, and that those words were not written in 776 BC in the superlative of the word,
right.
right? So they're written with this ER suffix. So I can be the swiftest today, but swifter tomorrow. What is your ER suffix that you're always pressing for in your life? And if we're holding on to these old stories, we're not able to see a new pathway. We're not able to revision something.
Yes.
The last thing I'll say on it is, so I did an activity and exercise with them. I call it go faster, right? You can go faster. And we pass an object around, we establish a pattern. And then I tell them after they do that, you start and stop with the person, you time it, and you can go faster. And we had 10 groups out there. You can go faster. You can go faster. And when they got to about the third iteration, no one's times were really advancing fast.
Mm,
They were right around the 4 second out of 10. And I said, the fastest group of 10 I've seen do this is under 2 seconds. And you could see them just kind of go back. These amazing leaders kind of sat back and said, huh, maybe I can think about this different. Maybe I can get rid of not holding on to this old idea of just let's move the circle closer. Maybe I can think outside of my own narrative and then come up with a way to pass this from hand to hand to the last hand, first hand to the last hand, faster. And so they did. They figured out the fastest group then became like, I think it was 2.37 seconds or something like that.
So amazing. What comes up for me when you talk about that is that sometimes there's some very clear shift. You can no longer play on your team in your sport. That was true for me when I decided to not be an actor. I was explicitly giving up an identity.
Right.
Or you lost your leg, right? It was very clear that the path forward had to be different in some way, right? And then you had to wrestle with the narratives. But there are other moments in which we aren't forced to examine our narratives, that we could just stay in old stories without investigating. Is this serving me? What might be possible if I shifted the narrative for myself? um, which is sort of that circle thing, right? Like we could just keep going here and saying, oh, this is the fastest we could be. But what if we unpack what are our assumptions, what are our stories underneath that, and what should we let go of, or what might we shift in order to be even more fill in the blank, more aligned with our goals, more effective. I
Yes. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I thought you were done. So go ahead.
Oh, what? Oh no, I
You're
was. I was going to ask you next another question.
no, yeah, I love your example. It's another one, a great one, right? When do we give, if we give our identity up, it is like a major shift, a performance shift of our one identity to the next. And it's, and the reason I chose in my company not to be use the ladder, climbing the corporate ladder as an analogy any longer, is because it gives a connotation that I'm elevating so much. I'm elevating over somebody
Mhm.
instead of honoring what they have built in my life to cause its identity for me to shift into another narrative.
Yeah.
And so I try to use stepping stones, right? I'm
Mm.
stepping on one stone to the next stone. So I'm going to honor the stone that was before me so that it gets me to the next stone in my life. And I can always kind of look back on that stone, but I'm not there any longer. So yeah, so
It's
I was-
beautiful, right? It's a different metaphors are great for this, right? They shift the way we understand the stories we tell inside our own head. And stepping stones is not hierarchical in the same way. I also feel like when I think about a ladder, I think there's like one next step. Like you have to take this next step or you've fallen off. As
right.
opposed to stepping stones, there's so many possibilities and what's next and where do I go? And it's beautiful. It's a very different story, isn't it? I
Yes, I
get
have so many metaphors and I mix them all up too many
it's
times.
well, you're a metaphor king. Um, a metaphor jukebox.
Jukebox. Yes, I like
Uh,
the jukebox.
w-
K5.
the question that it makes me think about is how do we know when a story is like, oh, this is a great lesson I learned that I always want to remember? My people in the world say never forget. There's like, we have experiences in our past. How do those inform us and help us? And how also might they be stories that get in our way and don't enable us to see the moment and what's needed in the moment? S- uh, I guess the bottom line question there is, right? How do we know? How do we distinguish between a story that is serving a purpose and is important to remember, and a story that is getting in our way and we need to let go
Yeah, that's I think going down that thesis route again. You
of?
know, the this might not make sense, but this is what's coming up for me. Well, one, the first thing is I believe we inherently know when we need to push to the next thing, and we just there's that little tug that says you need to try this, and then we say, I'm not sure if I want to try this, and we don't really lean into it. For example, I'll go back. I keep going back to Socure because um, when I heard what they wanted, it was not what I usually do. Right? It was not the story that I usually tell. This amputate to elevate, transform, adversity, and advantage. That's not what they needed. But he saw that's what the story he saw. So he said, I think I want to fit this story to help advance my team. I said, well, I'll do my signature story in that. However, you need this type of story. Your people are already slaying it. They're crushing it. We need to get them to get to a different level.
Mm.
And so you need this other story. So I just kind of called an audible and just did the slides a different way because I wanted them to take ownership. I never want someone to just kind of just hear my story just to hear the story. I want them to take action with the story that's relevant for them to shift their narrative.
Right.
And so what I was, I lost the story I want to share. The elevation of it all. I'll try to go to the elevation of the narrative of the story that we're talking about. And your question was why we hold on to them, or what was it?
The question was, well, how do we distinguish between a story that we should let go of and a story that is valuable and has lessons for us and that we want to hold on to?
Yeah, and the so when I I use an analogy around. Man, I don't know if I used it or somebody else brought it up. There was it's all blurry now.
Oh, ambient.
It's all
Kind of.
ambient. So it was Kodak, right? It was Kodak. They had the dominant lane, and they
Yep.
invented the digital footprint for technology for the digital, but they couldn't get out of the old story,
Right.
right? And when we can't get out of our own stories, it can cost us dearly for that. So I think the way that we understand it is when we feel that there's this when I begin to challenge when something comes up for me in my world, in my life, that I go, it's just challenging me, and I think I have this maybe a negative thought, or I'm like, why is that thought that who put that thought in my head to say that this may not be the right thing or
Mm,
pathway to go down? And as soon as I feel that, or I sense that, that's when I know my narrative might need to change, because it's never on somebody else, it's always on me. Why am I reacting this way? And then I can begin to uh, explore if I'm holding on to a story too long.
So if there's something happening that feels out of alignment with the moment you're in or your goals or your values, and you're like, oh, I'm having this thought, or I notice that I have this story, but it's not getting me where I want to go, or it doesn't feel aligned, that's when you go like, let me investigate what it is and see if what I need to shift. Am I getting
That's
that?
right. And then, sometimes I have to shift. There was a woman who came up to me after my presentation yesterday. She gave me some great advice. I love when people come up to me after your presentation and just start. Let me tell you how you could actually improve this. Unsolicited advice. But what I try to do in those moments is just relax here. Because I might be able to take a grain of nugget out of something.
Sure.
Um, and what am I resisting in that moment, right? Why am I resisting the feedback? So the I know what works, and I know what gets me booked. And sometimes when people give you that feedback on those things, they're not really, they just want to hear themselves talk, and aren't really adding, like, too much value. It was a good point, but she was doing it on something that I called an audible
Right.
inside the presentation,
Right.
because I wasn't built in. So she said, I think people were kind of struggling with the activity exercise, because you can make the instructions more simple. And I didn't just blurt out, I called an audible, right? That wasn't in the notes. That
Right.
wasn't in my program. I said in earlier, if you would have listened, you would have heard me say, if we go down a different path that y'all want to take, we'll explore that. So we're not beholden to the slides that I have here. So I didn't do that. I just kind of listen and say, what can I learn from
Yeah.
this feedback? How can I make
John,
that
you were
better? How can I
improvising?
set oh my gosh. Yeah, I was. Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's the way I've learned a lot, and just take it in, grain of salt.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, it links really to the last question I have for you today, which is, what are some practical steps we can take to recognize when a story is no longer serving us and then shift it?
Yeah, I think that's, well, kind of going on to that narrative, when the story's no longer serving us, is when we're kind of we're for me, it's when I'm complacent, when I'm just kind of going through the motions of it, or I hear myself telling it. It's like kind of the funny stuff we're talking about is like my dad. He has short-term memory loss, and so he'll say the same story over and over again. And I just sit there and I'll listen to it, because he doesn't realize he is telling me the story for the
No,
sixth time.
none of the rest of us do
And
that ever.
ever. So, and then the other funny piece of it is, sometimes we like our own stories, our own old narratives, and because we embellish them,
Yeah.
right? When I was in college, oh my gosh, let me tell you. wasn't like today's kids that way, And so we embellished the time period that we were in. That's why we want to kind of go back to the glory days, but they're gone. They're not. They don't serve us any longer because now we're living in that moment. Who is it? Diane Kander. Diane Kander. So she is the curiosity queen, right? And I watched her presentation at the National Speakers Association, another brilliant presenter, and she said, "Have you seen Snoop Dogg lately?" And Snoop Dogg's like all over the place. He's the mascot for the Olympics. He's on The Voice. He's got his own football team. He's got his clothing line. He's got his cereal line. All these things that Snoop Dogg is in because he continues. He relaunched Martha Stewart's career. He's in everything. He's trying to buy the Ottawa Senators, I think it was, to rebrand the hockey. All these things that he's in, staying relevant in the moment. And then she said, "So what's Vanilla Ice up to lately?" And she showed a clip of him talking about, "Man, I love the 90s. 90s were my jam. This is my jam. We're going to come out with me on the 90s tour." So her final statement was, "How fast are you innovating on a scale from Vanilla Ice to Snoop Dogg?" And that is releasing the old story. Think about where Snoop Dogg came from. He was talking, with NWA and all these hardcore rap groups, and talking in a narrative in Compton, California, and it's shifted that whole thing. That story hasn't left him. That was part of his upbringing, but now he's reinvented himself over and over again into America's darling at the Olympic Games. Who else is following him? All these other celebrities are now going to the Olympics because they're trying to position themselves, as Snoop did, 8 years ago, because the games are coming up in LA 2028. When he saw that happen, he said, "I'm going to be the person that's going to be on NBC in LA 2028 before all the other celebrities get their paws in on this."
Yep.
Right. So he has vision. Yeah. So that's how I think we let go of those old stories and serve this new narrative, constantly innovating.
So pay attention and recognize the stories that you're telling yourself, the things that you believe, try to get more conscious of them. Test them to see what is the current moment and is it serving me right now? What do I imagine? And then investigate and say, what might I shift, or what other stories could I tell, and how might that lead me to a vision of the future that is aligned with my goals and intention and values. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. And you
Cool.
said it more concise than I did. Thank you.
Well, I got to iterate on that. Brilliant. Okay, so is this when we play a game? And should we?
Yeah, let's play a game.
Yeah, let's use let's bring back one of our favorite tools from the world of improv, which is the story spine. And maybe you can type it in chat for people. The story spine, created by Ken Adams and then embraced by Pixar, is a series of sentences to help you craft the core action or narrative of a story. And the idea is that virtually all stories that are complete and satisfying have this core structure underneath them. So the story spine is once upon a time, every day. These are the sentence fragments that help you. And that's the platform of the story. Then, but one day is the catalyst or something that changes. In this case, what we're interested in is once upon a time, every day will be our old narrative, but one day will be something that shifts. The next part is the consequences of that shift, because of that, because of that, because of that, which leads to a climax where whatever question has been raised in this story is resolved or answered. The answer to that question becomes clear. That's until finally. And then finally, ever since then, which is the new reality, the new routine, the new story.
And then when I teach it, I always do the option on the end too. But we don't have to do that today.
The what?
Yeah, the option on the end is the lesson,
The moral of the story
the
is.
moral of the story.
That's right.
So yeah,
That's right.
but other than I
We can. I love adding the moral of the story. I think it's great.
moral.
So what? Maybe let's start with. I'll cue you, or you can cue me. You tell me which way you want to go. Do you want me to tell a story? Or you want to tell?
Yeah, you start telling the story. Well,
Okay. So, once upon a time, I was a struggling actor in New York City, and I thought, and every day I thought that was the only way to have a fulfilling life, and that my entire identity wrapped around being an actor, even though I wasn't getting any work.
Until one day.
Yeah. Until one day, I got very sick and I was paralyzed. And it gave me a lot of time to reflect. I had 6 or 8 months of rehabilitation, and it gave me a chance to reflect on what I actually wanted and cared about.
And because of
that, when I went back to my old life, because I was still clinging to that identity and my story, I was a little less motivated and started looking around for other possibilities.
And because of
that, I discovered improvisation, because rather than just being alone out in the cold world looking for work, I had a community of people that I could be part of. Until finally, I embraced the power of improv for living instead of just being an actor. And I realized that there are all sorts of ways to feel fulfilled and to bring what I cared about, which was connection and expression, other than being hired as a professional actor. And ever since then, I'm hung out with you doing this.
Right. Yay!
One version of the story, we were improvising that. I don't know if that's the story the way I would tell it in my keynote address, but it is interesting to play with what was the old story and then what was the catalyst. Maybe being sick wasn't the catalyst. Maybe the catalyst was, but one day I realized I wanted a family and I cared about that more than being, on stage. I don't know, but there it is.
Oh, that's great. I did it with the group yesterday, and at a National Speakers Association Ohio chapter, and we played with. I just said, "Look, this is a way to do it. It gives you a framework." I think the other reason why people are so afraid of the new narrative is because they're not an expert in the new narrative, and I say you have to give yourself space and grace to grow. Going through this is tough. I mean, the first time I was doing story spy and all this, I was like fumbling. I still fumble on it, right? But it's okay. It might not be the same thing. I guess I can doing one now.
Yeah, let's do one.
So I'll try to stay in the same with this narrative around. Just once upon a time, I was living as a person that was temporarily able. And every day I would go about my life oblivious to what people with disabilities were going through and living. Until one day I had an accident which thrust me into this community. And my world shifted. And because of that, I began to understand that there were blind spots I had all along in my life when it came to people with disabilities. And because of that, began to see the value of people with disabilities in not only their daily lives, but in the workplaces. And because of that, I started building out um, programs to help other people see the value of those with disabilities in life. Uh, and because of that, I built out a business to help people do that. What's the next one? Until
So finally,
finally, the business that I built um, was able to get large companies to shift their own narratives around how they saw people with disabilities, including um, turning a performance of those that were injured on the battlefield into a program that Prince Harry runs and the Invictus Games. Um, and then
ever
what's the,
since then,
ever since then, I have been uh, globe hopping, trying to continue to shift people's minds to see the value of people with disabilities in the workplace.
hallelujah,
Hallelujah.
hallelujah. Well, if people, circling back to the beginning of our conversation,
Mhm.
uh, if we can't watch something like the Paralympic Games or have conversations like this one and recognize that folks with even visible disabilities, we all have something, right?
Right, right.
Are not a huge source of capacity and capability and strength, and an asset, then they're just not listening to the story. So
They're not listening to the story.
come on, people, let's shift it.
Let's shift. Let's do a performance shift on it. This has been great. I always love talking with you. We continue to have these conversations. They always lift me, and I get a better day every time I get a chance to talk to you. You can follow Kat at Kopet, KOPETT.com. You can follow myself at johnregister.com. Kat has a few books that are out there. You see the two in the background there. One is Training to Imagine, and the other one is just brand new, hot off the presses. The Facilitation Advantage: How to Drive Impact, Build Relationships, and Lead with Influence. My book's not here because it's out there, and it's 10 Power Stories to Impact Any Leader. Journal your way to leadership success. I also do what I call a Forward Friday newsletter, and we're going to shift that. Actually, we're going to shift it up a little bit after talking to Sonia Dumas. We're going to make it a video um, think letter, and it's going to be for more executives to jump in and just have a wonderful, like a great conversation. We already got some people on board with the, asking those right questions, because as we talk today, we can't hold on to our old stories. We have to always continue to advance. Any closing thoughts for us today, Kat?
I think you said it. Go off, investigate your narratives, shift them where they can be better.
Absolutely. So that's it for today's episode of Performance Shift, where we are letting go of our old stories. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and gained some valuable insights that you can apply to your own life and work. If you want to learn more about the power of transformation and how you can shift your own performance to achieve your goals and dreams, be sure to subscribe to the newsletter, LinkedIn Live, Facebook, YouTube channel, and join us for our next episode when we come back. We'll let you know out in the ether world there. And if you found this episode helpful, we'd love for you to leave us a review, push on your social media channels, and your feedback helps us to improve every one of our shows. So we'll see you on the next episode where we'll talk about all kind of stories that we are celebrating. Thank you, Kat. Thank you all for listening in. We'll see you next time on another episode of Performance Shift. Bye for now.